So yes, basically we did back in the 2012, 2013, and marginally into 2014. Um, a quest for waders. We basically travelled the world as much as we could on the meagre finances we had to see as many wader species as possible. The idea being that we would be able to use that experience to then raise money to help wader species, but specifically at the time it was for the spoon-billed sandpiper. So that's how we came to be whizzing around all over the shop. So, oh, oh goodness me, sorry, I've got a, sorry. Right, let's start again. A quest for waders, Wader Quest on Safari. So, as you mentioned, this is about our trip to Southern Africa. It's not just South Africa. As you'll see, we travelled around a little bit, and it's basically got the subtitle Limpopo and Beyond because I just wanted to call it that. That's the title of the chapter in the book, which I will inevitably mention later on. So there's Elis on the beach at the Cape, photographing kelp gulls, and somewhere in there, oh, yeah, just about off to the right here, you can see there's an African oystercatcher. But we will come to all that a bit later. So here we are. These were the trips that we made. We didn't do one round the world trip. We were whizzing backwards and forwards. So you can see the blue line there is us whizzing from London down to Johannesburg, and the little flag there is the South African flag. Now, one of the birds that you see everywhere, which has already been mentioned, is the Blacksmith Lapwing. Now, this bird is quite a remarkable bird, actually. It's one of the few birds that's actually expanding its range. It is a bird that I'm glad to say you can often see from the aeroplane before you've even, providing it's daylight, of course, before you've even hit the terminal building. And in fact, we did see one as we were taxiing up to the terminal building. Now, the beauty of these is that, as I say, they are lapwings, and lapwings are my favourite birds because my favourite bird is the northern lapwing, our lapwing. So anything that's associated with lapwings is always a great pleasure to me. Now, the scientific name is Vanellus armatus, as you can see there. What you can't see is the reason that it's called that, because they have great. I hope you can see the cursor here, but just on the carpal joint here, they have some rather nasty looking spurs. A number of lapwing species have these spurs, but not all of them. Some have and some don't. And this is one that does, and it was named after that. They are a fairly ubiquitous species. You will see them in parks as well as out in the sticks. And when you first get to Africa, you start hearing them. Once you get in places where you can start seeing birds, you start hearing them, and they make a lovely sound, which sounds like a hammer being hit on an anvil, hence the name Blacksmith Lapwing. Now, I say it's a lovely sound. It just goes ding, 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 which is lovely for the first 5 minutes. After about 2 hours of hearing tink, 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 tink repeatedly, it does get a bit desperate, I have to say. But there we are. That was us off to a flying start from the aeroplane, getting our first wader species, the Blacksmith Lapwing. Now, they're lovely looking birds, but they're not actually terribly nice in some ways. I'm sure you're aware that many lapwings are very territorial. They're very aggressive, and in fact, these birds have been known to see off elephants when they've been protecting their young. And unfortunately, the protection of young doesn't extend to other species, because this species has been recorded chasing and, in fact, corralling a Kitlis's plover chick into a position where it can actually catch it and then eat it. So these are somewhat rather more not sort of carnivorous. What's the word? What's the word? You eat your own species. I've forgotten it. Well, you all know. No, cannibal. That's it. Cannibalistic. Good Lord. Anyway, so they're not altogether nice, but they are certainly lovely birds to look at. Now, talking about being altogether nice, here is a group of people who call themselves Way Across South Africa. To the left is Jenny Charland, Peter Charland, her husband, and Sue Ertley, which is Peter's sister, and they constitute basically Way to Coast South Africa. It's not really affiliated to us. They just like what we do, and they lived in South Africa, so they just call themselves that as sort of an informal thing. And it was them that invited us to come to South Africa, and we made the arrangements, etc., etc. And the reason why I'm specifically mentioning them, because we had people all over the world were helping us, but these particular people went above and beyond, because not only did they offer to help us find, know where to go to look for the birds, they offered to take us to find them themselves on a 10-day safari, which they paid for. So we were extremely indebted to them because we were on a pretty tight budget, and their generosity meant that we were able then to have another small trip at the end to get some more species. So they were fantastic. Now, Sue was largely the organizer, and when we arrived, it was Sue that took us to our very first destination, when she chucked us in her car and whisked us off south. We were going south into the Orange Free State, and we were going to stay at this place called the Harimboom Guest Farm. Now, the fact that the guest farm billboard has got a picture of a courser on it is actually, I think it's supposed to be a Temming courser, but we'll ignore that. It's actually quite important for us because the reason for going there was that we were hoping to see a fairly rare species of courser, which I will come to in due course. On the way down, we came across many of these. These are the crowned lapwings, again, which have been mentioned to you. Vanellus coronatus, not a lot of prizes for guessing what coronatus means. They too are of least concern. They're fairly ubiquitous. But by and large, these birds prefer drier areas to the Blacksmith's lapwing. So you don't often see them together, although you can do. You don't often see them together. The Blacksmith's lapwings, as I mentioned before, I think are increasing in their numbers, largely because of the number of dams and artificial pools that are being created as sort of feeding pools for livestock and so on and so forth. But they're both equally common in that sense. They also can be pretty aggressive, like all lapwings, but they haven't been recorded eating their friends' chicks just recently, so that's probably a good thing. Now, when we got there quite late in the afternoon. We'd seen these birds on the way down, so far we were doing very well. Not only seeing two species, but they were both lapwings, which cheered me up immensely. We stayed the night at the Harimboom Guest Farm, and Rietta Griesel, who's the lady who runs it, said the plan was that we would have a good night's rest after our exhausting journey. But we would get up early in the morning. We would go birding to go and look for these rare coursers, and then be back home for a lovely sumptuous breakfast, because they were not far away, and we were sure to see them. Don't you just love it when people say that? So it was that we got up in the morning, and before breakfast, against my better judgment, I should point out, we went to this place, and it's called the Gariep Dam. Now, just so as you know, that is not the dam. Quite clearly, as a dam, that would be pretty ineffective, be these dirty great holes in. That is actually a railway line, I believe. The dam itself holds back this water, but you can see it had been a hot time, and it was fairly low. The water was fairly low, which revealed a lot of this mud area, much more than usual. And it was on this muddy area where we were to start looking for our courser. And I'll tell you, it's the Birchall's courser, the one we were looking for. And the reason we were excited, and the reason why Sue specifically took us there, is because this species is nomadic. It tends not to stay around in one place for too long, especially as this was likely to be an ephemeral habitat for them, because when the water comes back up, this land would disappear and they wouldn't have anywhere to do their courser-like things. So that was a bit of background as to why we were at this place. And when we got there, Rieta said, well, we'll just drive along and I'll go to all the places I've seen them over the last few days, and we'll bump into them somewhere. So bear in mind that the way a courser, if you've seen coursers, you'll know what I mean. They behave in very much the same way as plovers do, with a run, stop, and peck sort of attitude. They do a lot of running around and stopping suddenly before feeding, etc., etc. So we were going along very, very slowly, and I was looking intently out of the window, trying to find something that would run, stop, and peck. And then I did. I spotted it. I said, "Stop the car! Stop the car! Stop the car!" And passed my bins out of the window, and I was actually looking at a Kitlitz's plover and not a Burchell's courser. Now, let me tell you that a Kitlitz's plover, Charadrius pecuarius has got something to do with herds of cattle. It kind of indicates that the sort of place where you would see them would be grazing lands, that sort of thing. I've always wanted to see a Kitlitz's plover ever since I was a young lad, and I saw its name in a book, and for some reason that name resonated with me. I said, one day I'm going to see a Kitlitz's plover. So, would you believe it? Here I was looking out for my Burchell's coursers, and I see a Kitlitz's plover, and somehow I managed to feel disappointed. Isn't that incredible? So it soon dawned on me what I was thinking so erroneously about this. And I thought, oh, this is a Kitlitz's plover. And as I said, I always imagine that special moment when I write in my book, Kitlitz's plover, in my notebook. So I got out the whole book and wrote it down. And I looked at my book expecting to be very happy with the results of what I'd done. And it said Kiltitzes. I had actually misspelt a name that I'd been dying to write for decades, and I'd misspelt it at the moment of excitement. Unbelievable. But there we are. As you can see, it's an absolutely beautiful bird. And when you're looking for something else, somehow these common birds, and believe you me, we saw lots of them in the end, somehow take away the excitement that you would normally expect to see them. But driving on, we went a bit further, and Rieta kept saying things like, "Oh, I saw them here last week," or "This is where they were a fortnight ago," and "This is where they were yesterday," and all this sort of stuff. As I'm getting further and further into this trip, I'm getting more and more anxious, because it's quite clear that these birds are not at any of the places where she's seen them before. And then she said, "Well, I've never had to drive this far to see these birds before. This is all a bit worrying." And in fact, you could tell she was getting anxious, because her head was flying from side to side. The knuckles on her fingers were going white as she gripped the steering wheel, and she was really beginning to get desperate. I was actually getting desperate as well, not just because we hadn't seen the coursers, but because breakfast was being left behind in our wake, and I was getting a bit concerned about this. When all of a sudden we got to a point where she said, "I've never seen them, and they've never had to come this far to see them before." All of a sudden, she burst into very loquacious Afrikaans. And of course, I had absolutely no idea what she was. She was waving her arms around and shouting and goodness knows what. And I thought that she'd probably remembered that she'd left the oven on, and that Haringboom guest farm was about to burn down, and all the rest, all the terrible things it sounded that she was shouting. And I turned to Sue, who actually knew a little bit of Afrikaans, of course. And I said, "What did she say?" She said, "She's found them." All those words to say she's found them. I think "Dank the Himmel" was the only thing I heard, was "Thank the heavens." Anyway, there they were in front of us, pottering about, and they're peculiar birds. The coursers are very interesting. I like them, and cursorius comes from the Latin to mean basically towards about running or being a courier, but in the sense of running. And you can see rufous obviously refers to this lovely rufous colour they have in their cheeks and forehead, and the males here down the back of the neck. Absolutely super little birds. But you can see, look at the quality of the photograph we managed to get with the Kitlitz's plover, because in the car we managed to get very close. But even in the car, these birds had a limit to how close you get. If Rieta would edge the car forward just slightly, they would move away another few feet, and you'd get further, they'd move away a few feet. And we never really got very, very close to them. But at the end of the day, we were very, very happy, at least to have seen them. Their numbers are declining, which is worrying because a lot of the open savanna areas which they depend on, a lot of that is now being afforested. It's turned to arable, and a lot of irrigation, sort of a flooding of areas for agriculture and also for cattle grazing, pesticides, getting rid of the insects eating, so and of course a lot of disturbance. And these are very shy birds. Some birds are approachable. These most definitely are not. But of course, we were utterly thrilled to see them. When we got back then to the guest farm, unfortunately, the breakfast had been kept in the oven for a little bit too long and was not quite as wonderful as we'd hoped it would be. But the joy of seeing a Birchall's courser as well as a Kitlis's plover, of course, outweighed all of that stuff. And Sue then chucked us back in the car and drove us back to Johannesburg, where we spent the night. And next morning we were heading north through South Africa and heading north. And it was funny because before we went, they kept telling me, you would make sure you bring some warm clothes with you. It all seemed a little bit odd to me to be given warm clothes when you're hoping to go to Africa. You think of it as being a hot place, but trust me, when you get up in the morning in some of these places, these Mopani forests and so on, they're really quite cool, and you can see the mist hanging over the little valley there. So we set off dead north, and we were heading for a place called Kasane, which is in Botswana. Now, as you're driving along, of course, as birders, we've always got our eyes open, and every now and then we'd pass a watering hole or something, and we'd have to stop to look for this particular bird here, the three-banded plover. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Now, how many bands can you see on that bird? You see, I'm a bit strange because I only count the black bits, so that's 1, 2. It looks like a two-banded plover to me because that is the same as that, so it's background colour and not a band. However, this is what it's called. It's called a three-banded plover. Tricolaris, obviously, the scientific name for it. They're very sweet little birds, actually, about the same size as our ring plover. That lovely red eye ring and red bill, and but they tend. We had a lot of trouble photographing them because if they were close, they were against the sun, or they were a long way away. We never really got some really good photographs. And this picture, when Elis took it, was more or less. Not more or less a silhouette, but with her great skill on the old computer and these wonderful things that you can do now with photographs that are less than optimal, she managed to bring out some of the lovely grey colours and the browns, and it's actually quite a smart-looking bird. But as we were driving, as we got to the border, I suddenly learnt that the border with Botswana at that point is the Limpopo River. Now, I'm sure many of you were, like me as a young person, bounced upon your mother's knee and told the stories from the great Rudyard Kipling of the Just So stories, where particularly the one where the elephant got its trunk, and when I still remember those stories, and the thing that always got to my imagination was a phrase: was the great grey-green greasy Limpopo River all set about with fever trees. And as a child, I had this image of what that looked like, this great big river, all green and greasy looking, and these horrible trees hanging over the side of it. And so as we went over the river, I asked the driver if they would be so kind as to slow down. That was Sue that was driving at the time. Would you slow down? I must get a photograph, or at least must get a photograph of the great grey-green greasy Limpopo River. And there it is, the great grey-green greasy Limpopo. And it certainly is grey-green, and it is greasy looking. Not particularly great. I think perhaps when Kipling saw it was closer to the sea than we were. But this bit all set about with fever trees. I wondered what that was all about. And I wondered, looking at this picture here, you can see there's a lot of dead-looking trees. And I thought, well, maybe they are the fever trees, maybe. But you see, as a child, this is what I imagined a fever tree would look like, all oozing darkness and stench and just being generally revolting. But in fact, a fever tree looks like this. It's a type of acacia, and those absolutely sweet smelling, beautiful little yellow balls of flowers. Each of those little bits is a little flower within the ball there, and they're just absolutely super. And the reason they're called fever trees is because before people had made the link between mosquitoes and water and malaria, they found that people that lived closer to the water, which is where the fever tree grows, it always grows along the edges of rivers. Excuse me. They found that if people lived where the fever trees were, they would get sick, and so they thought it was the trees. So that's why fever tree. And the Vaccalia xanthoploea is refers to Vaccalia was a chap that the genus is named after a chap called Vackel. But if you look, xanthoploea means yellow bark, and you can see that the bark of that twig that you can see there is actually very clear. So I was a bit surprised. I can't say I was disappointed because they're beautiful, beautiful plants, but I still look at these and wonder how it is that animals eat acacias. When you look at those fearful thorns, it still beggars belief that they can do that. So there we are then. We're now in Botswana. There's little Botswana's flag. We've due north, crossed the Limpopo, and have driven into Botswana. Now, the destination was a place called Elephant Sands. And this is why it's called Elephant Sands, because there are elephants and a lot of sand. Makes a lot of sense. Now, I'm going to say here, I'm going to tell you quite categorically, I have a very healthy respect for wild animals. I'm of the opinion that people and wild animals should keep their distance one from the other because, these benign looking elephants, all lovely and charming and all the rest of it, if you get too close to one and it's having a bad day, it's got a headache or it just isn't in a good mood, it can kill you. So my theory is stay away from wild animals. That's the way I feel about it. Lovely as elephants are. So then I was standing looking at this and two things came to my mind. The first one was this sign, wild elephants, no one beyond this point. I mean, I, for one, was not going to go beyond that point. There wasn't any way. I could easily have stepped over this tiny little wall, but I wasn't going to. But what I wondered was, is there a sign on the other side that says wild people, no elephants beyond this point? Because an elephant could step over that and not even notice it had done this. So I wondered how these elephants knew that they weren't supposed to come into our bit. And I also wondered, if no people are allowed beyond this point, how do you get to the places where you're supposed to stay? That all looked rather precarious to me, wandering around where these elephants were. But I was assured that you only get to those places in a vehicle, and therefore it is utterly safe. And you can see that they're all fairly sturdy looking, aren't they? Lovely. So I was quite relieved by all that. So here we are. This is one of the sturdy places, and we got into the Jeep and were taken around to the various places. And Sue and her daughter, who was with her, and also Peter and Jenny with their daughter who was with them, they were given chalets just like this one, very sturdy looking, lots of wood and bracing, and all of this here is just to stop the elephants brushing against the back of the hut and so on and so forth. And I was quite reassured that they looked fairly elephant proof. And then we were the last, Elis and I were the last to be dropped off. And as we came around the corner, the lady in charge said, and this, Mr. and Mrs. Simpson, this is your hut. Now, I don't know if you remember the big bad wolf, but when I saw the hut that we were to stay in, the expression, I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down, was very quick to mind. I have to say, it didn't look particularly elephant proof to me. Now, I'd like you to notice this, because I noticed it at the time and I wondered, why on earth they put a load of straw basically by the back of our hut. It struck me that if elephants eat straw, that's probably not a good place to put it because they might want to come and eat it. But there you are. That's what they did. So looking at that, this bit here looks fairly solid, doesn't it? You've got the bamboo here, and this looks fairly solid. But from inside, you'll find out that those solid-looking bits are in fact just gauze screens. They're not solid at all. So this thing is looking decidedly precarious. Now, this bed, as you can see, is very close to the edge of the hut, which is where they happen to leave those bits of straw, very close to where our head happens to be. And so I said to Elis, I'm not really sure that this is as safe as it should be. At that point, the lady said, oh, by the way, there's a hole in your roof. I said, oh, that's charming. Why is there a hole in the roof? Just to prove the point, there's my hand sticking out of the hole. Why is there a hole in our roof? And this is what it looked like from inside. It was in the part that they call the bathroom. And when you're having a shower, you can look up and see the stars. And then I discovered that probably you could look up and see the stars and go face to face with an elephant, because I discovered the reason it had a hole in the roof was because that very day an elephant had eaten it. And I thought to myself, I do not really want to be in an elephant's breakfast. But there we are. I had no choice, but we had to spend the night in this hut. Well, needless to say, in the middle of the night, that pile of reeds or whatever it was became too much of a temptation for an elephant, and it came and it started eating them. I got decidedly nervous. I woke Elis up, who was sleeping soundly. I said, there's an elephant outside. She said, so? There's lots of elephants outside. Yeah, but it's right outside, and it's chomping. And if we sneeze or speak too loud, we might frighten it, and it'll knock the hut down and crush us to death. And she said, "Oh, grow up and go to sleep." So I should point out, this is a lady who I've actually seen stand on a chair with a mouse in the room, a little mouse that couldn't do her any harm at all, scared to death. Blooming great elephant that could kill her with a swipe of his trunk. Scared, no interest whatsoever. But
elephant is scared of mouses.
But she does like to point out that elephants are also scared of mice. So therefore, I'm not quite sure what sort of an argument that is, but there we are. That's her theory. Well, of course, needless to say, we got through the night. The elephant wandered off, and we survived. And I was, in the morning, in the cold light of day, I did feel a little bit embarrassed about my little outburst of cowardice. So I said, look, what we should do is we should go out and find an elephant, go out and have a wander around. And what I'd like you to do is take a picture of me standing looking all brave and safari-like with an elephant walking behind us. Behind me, and that would be good for the talk. I'm bound to give a talk about this, so we'll do that. So sure, yeah, fine, we'll do that. So we're walking along, minding our own business, and suddenly we came round a corner, and there was this lady standing there. And you can see that the lady is not unaware of our presence. She's turned her head to say, hello, people. And I said, here's our chance, I said, and turned my back on the elephant and asked Elis to take a picture of me with the elephant in the background. At that very point that she lifted her camera up to take the picture, there was an almighty, sorry about that, from behind me. It was our friend. I turned to look at her briefly, and she was running towards us with her ears flapping and her head down, and she was charging us. And I mean, you know, that, well, I don't need to tell you, because this is my picture of me being brave in front of an elephant. Well, that elephant was coming for us, right? We scarpered out of there. Fortunately, it was one of those false charges just to tell us to mind our own business and go away, which of course we did. And I'm never going to ask to have my photograph taken in front of an elephant again, except maybe in a zoo. And that is the end of that little story. So that was quite something. So beware, wild animals are wild animals, and they're not always in a good mood. That's that. Anyway, so we left then this particular place to my great relief, and we headed up to the border with Namibia, and we were heading up there because there's a river there as well, which is called the Chobe River. And this was the place, Kasani, that we were heading to. And this is the rock prating coal. Glariola means stony, so it's an allusion to the stony ground that they like. Not just this one, but all prating coals are called Glariola. And Nuchalis refers to the white collar, which goes around to the nuka being nape. So it refers to the white collar. They're absolutely super lovely little birds. Absolutely love them. Now, when we first got there, we went to where we were supposed to see them, and the river was quite strong, but the rocks were all showing. And unfortunately, we're quite a long way away from them because they were flying up and down, and we could see them flying around and around. Now, this species here is monogamous. They mate for life, and they're monogamous. In the breeding season, they're also very territorial, so you don't see many of them together. And outside the breeding season, like many prating coals, they can form into loose flocks. And they only breed in the dry season because after the rains, when the water subsides, this rock, like the one that it's standing on here, they become visible once again, and this is the sort of place where they breed. So this was getting on for after the rains, and the birds were there, but there was still a number of them. They hadn't paired off just yet. So this photograph, however, was taken the next morning because Sue had arranged for us to have a boat trip, which is absolutely fantastic. So the first thing we did once we got into the boat in the morning was head up to these rocks at my request, because I really wanted to get closer views of these little beauties. As you see, that was worthwhile because they are absolutely smashing little birds. And also an added bonus was on the same rocks, we had the water thickney, also least concern, Berhenus, which means bull-nosed, and vermiculatus. Vermiculatus comes from the Latin worm-like, and it refers to the vermiculations, of course, these sort of squiggly lines that you get here all over the bird. That's why it's called vermiculatus. They are quite common. They are, unlike our stone curlews, they are birds that like to live near water, hence the name water thickney. And they like these rocks. They also like river edges, and sometimes they're around still water as well. So a bit of a bonus for us. Again, because they were on the rocks, they felt they were safe. We were in a boat no more than 10 feet away from them. So we were able to get these lovely pictures to show the vermiculations in their plumage. As we left there, we were then going upriver. We'd gone downriver to get to the rocks. We're now going upriver, so we're going a little bit more slowly. And the next wader that we saw was a jacana. Now, jacanas are waders. They look more like gallinules or moorhen type birds, as you can see. But the African jacana, Actophyllornis meaning a water edge loving bird, which is absolutely fair enough. Africanus is obviously an allusion to the fact that it's from Africa. Now, Actophyllornis means water's edge. Now, if you think about it, jacanas, you don't often see them at the water's edge. Usually you see jacanas in this situation on the lily pads, hence the other name lily trotter. And look at these phenomenal toes. These phenomenal toes mean that their weight is spread out over a greater area, which enables them to walk on these lily pads. And look at this great big long toenail at the back here. Extraordinary looking things. But they are quite fantastic. Not quite uniquely, but one of the very few waders that when they molt all their flight feathers at the same time. So they become actually flightless. Which you might think was a pretty dangerous thing to do. But they have a strategy. If they get attacked from a bird of prey, for example, they'll dive into the water, and they'll hang on to stuff under the water, reeds and so on and so forth, and they can stay there for quite a long time. And what they do is they'll sit with their beak just sticking out of the water so they can breathe, and they can stay like that for quite some time. I think one species recorded doing it for about 40 minutes or so before they felt brave enough to come back out of the water. But in our case, we didn't see them. We were on a fast flowing river, so there were no lily pads. So we did see it actually walking along the water's edge. It was a bit far away to get a decent photograph. But the name Actophyllornis actually did what it said on the tin, so to speak, as far as that one was concerned for us. As we were going along, in the distance, we could see some rather flat islands in the middle of the river, and these were grass covered and had not long been uncovered by the descending waters. And one of the very first things we could see, even from a distance, were these birds with great big white wings, and it turned out to be these long-toed lapwings. Vanellus, which still means Vanellus, the name for the genus for lapwings. Thrasirostris means thick build, basically, or heavy build. It has got a fairly heavy build, but what you can't really see is the long toes. Now, this bird you can see was fairly agitated. It was shouting and screaming and giving us all sorts of grief. And it's a typical lapwing sort of behavior, but the sort of behavior you would expect if they were particularly stressed about something. And in the end, we realized why they were stressed, because standing not far away, right next to this really attractive old bottle that's obviously been discarded by somebody and come down the river, was the chick. Now, if you look at the toes of that, this is a chick, remember. This very, very long middle toe, in fact, the front toes are very long on this bird, and that is why it's called a long-toed lapwing. And it sort of takes a niche that no other lapwing does, because it too can walk on floating vegetation, which gives it an edge. It's a place where other lapwings can't go. But lapwing chicks are generally very, very pretty, but this one, not so much. This isn't one of the prettier lapwing chicks, it has to be said. But the thing with these birds is that they have the whitest wings of all the lapwings. You can see that just the first three primaries there are black, and the rest of the wing is white. There are two subspecies. There is another subspecies that actually has black along the trailing edge of the flight feathers, but this has got the whitest wings of all of the lapwings. And not coincidentally, but while we're on the subject of that, Blacksmith lapwings are the only lapwing that have absolutely no white in their wings at all. So there's just a little thing there. So we enjoyed watching these birds immensely, and while we were doing so, we noticed these pratincoles, collared pratincoles, the staying pratincoles that we see in Europe. Pratincola. Do you ever wonder where that name came from? Well, it comes from pratum in Latin, meaning meadow, and incola, meaning inhabitant. So they're inhabitants of meadows, which is, again, fair enough. But the interesting thing was these birds seem to be paired up. Now, we are down in South Africa, and in my rather ignorant way, I thought that the only pratincoles that occurred, collared pratincoles that occurred in southern Africa were actually migrants. And I couldn't work out why they were paired and looking in pretty good breeding plumage. It all seemed a bit strange to me. But, they say hindsight is a clever old thing. And I discovered later, looking at this map, that this is Botswana here. So we were just in this little bit, this section here, more or less. So they're resident there. Blue is wintering. Sorry, not resident. They breed there. Purple is where they do both, and the orange is where they breed. So these are migrants that have come in from these wintering grounds in order to breed in the inland territories here, before going back out again. So that really explained why it was that they were in full breeding plumage and looking like a pair. So we all learn something new every day. At that point, it was decided. Sue and the driver had a little chat, and they decided something between them. And they said to Elis and me, said, do sit down, relax, because we're going to be driving very, very quickly along the river because we need to get quite a long way. In fact, much further than the boatman normally goes. And they're going there especially for you. And I was quite intrigued by this, of course, and I wanted to find out why it was. But I sat back and we whizzed along, and the wind was whistling through my hair. Yeah, okay. Well, it would have been whistling through my hair if I had any. I actually had to take my hat off because we were going so fast. And eventually, after what seemed like an age, I have to admit, suddenly the boat slowed, and the boatman turned it round towards the bank, and we drifted slowly in. And he said, well, there you are then. And I couldn't see anything. I have to admit, I couldn't see very much at all. And he said, it's there. What you're looking for. And there it was. It was a white-crowned lapwing. Now, you've got to admit that is one of the most splendid lapwings. All lapwings are wonderful, but that is one of the most splendid lapwings you could possibly hope to come across. It's absolutely beautiful. Albiceps actually means white-headed, which is a bit strange because really it's just the top of the head which is white, which is why most people these days in English call it a white-crowned lapwing. Look at these extraordinary lappets here. Unbelievable. Look like it's just eaten a banana, or it's got a banana skin hanging out of its mouth. Absolutely fantastic. Beautiful greys, chocolate browns and blacks and white. Look at that colour of those legs. Absolutely stunning birds. And that eye is absolutely cutting. It's beautiful eye. And so we sat and looked at these. I was utterly mesmerized when I finally saw one. You only see them when they move, strangely enough. When I finally saw one, I was utterly mesmerized by it. Just couldn't take my eyes off it. But eventually, of course, the boatman said, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to go, because if I don't get back for the next trip out, I'm going to be in trouble. So we've got to go whizzing back. We won't be able to stop anymore, I'm afraid. Well, he was not quite truthful in that, because we did actually stop, because as we went past those islands again on the way back down towards where we started, we went the other side of the islands, and as we did so, we came across this fella. Now that is a dirty, great big crocodile, as you can see. I mean, it's huge. Now, normally, Elis doesn't like to take pictures with people and sort of human paraphernalia in the same picture as the animals. But we've done this really. We used this picture really to show you the scale. I mean, they're real people. That's a real boat. They're not models. They're not toys. That is a real boat, real people, and that is a huge crocodile. And fortunately, it was enjoying the early morning sun, I suppose, and really took no notice of us whatsoever. But this little pause to look at this giant gave Elis the opportunity to find yet another lapwing species for us, the African wattled lapwing. These are the wattles here. These, as I said, the lappets. These are wattles around the eyes, and this is very closely related to the white-crowned lapwing, as you can really make that out. The name Vanellus senegalis is actually quite interesting because it gives the impression of obviously that they're from Senegal, and indeed you can see them in Senegal, where we're at the other end of Africa here. But you have to be careful with this because there is a bird called a Senegal lapwing, which is called something quite different. It's called lugubris, which I think means dull or not very exciting or something very much like it. But anyway, this is a very common bird right across Africa. Nevertheless, it was the first one we saw, so we were very, very happy to see it. Once we'd finished our little day trip out the morning trip out on the boat, we did a bit of general birding. Then we got back in our vehicles and headed then across the river and into Namibia. And this is the Namibian flag. Now, I'm sure most of you are aware that Namibia is a huge country over here. But there's a little bit that runs across the top. It's a very, very thin piece of land that runs across the top of Botswana, and it's called the Caprivi Strip. And that was where we were heading. Now, there was a very good reason for us to go there. is because we were after one particular wader. This is it, the Caspian Plover, Charadrius asiaticus. Unfortunately, you can see the photograph here is by Tommy Peterson, and it had to be because we didn't see it. We searched all of the likely places. We went up and down the Caprivi Strip. We could not find a single Caspian plover. And to this day, I still have not seen Caspian plover. I even tried twitching one on sillies once and didn't see that either. So Caspian plover is a bit of a sore point to me. The other problem that we came across was that you have to be a little bit careful where you drive when you're driving around in Namibia, because this unfortunate car, which happens to be the one we were in, looks as if this is where we were searching for Caspian plovers on this sort of habitat here. It looks as if it's stuck in the mud. Well, unfortunately, it wasn't stuck in the mud. This whole area is what they call a sewage farm. And what happens is all the sewage gets pumped into this area, and when it's flooded, and then it dries out, and then it dries out, of course, it disintegrates and so on and so forth and becomes soil eventually, I think is the plan. Unfortunately, we hadn't quite got to that point yet. And so we ended up with our car in the Rundu sewage works, rather, should I say, bogged down. Now, it's a bit, it wasn't very pleasant. We did eventually get out thanks to some we put bits of stuff underneath the wheels. And I say I didn't do much of this because, I'm an elderly gent with a bad back. But we did eventually get out. We did have some help from a couple of passing police officers. There's a road not far off to the left where you're looking there. And they'd obviously just come on duty. They're absolutely pristine, a male and a female, absolutely pristine, beautiful, beautiful uniform. And they insisted that they were going to help push the car out. And they did. And of course, the wheels spun and those two people got absolutely caked in mud. And they didn't stop smiling for a minute, bless them. Absolutely wonderful people. The people of Namibia, particularly this area, struck us as being particularly lovely people. And I thought they would go back to the police station, but no, they carried on their patrol. They went off into the town all covered in, well, that stuff. Not very, very pleasant. No, we didn't see any new waders when we were in Namibia. But to compensate for that, we did see this. It's a thing called a Shalo's Turaco, or Turaco Shaloe. Shalo was a chap after whom it's named. And we were having dinner that evening, al fresco, having a barbecue, and this bird came and sat in the tree above us. So I'm going to give it an honorary status of a wader on the grounds that it's absolutely beautiful, and therefore, as all waders are beautiful, it gets the honorary status. But as I say, wader-wise, Namibia was a bit of a disappointment to us. So we headed back down into Botswana, and we went to a place which I'm sure you will have heard of, the Okavango Delta. I expect you would have seen a program. It's David Attenborough or one of those people did a program about this when I was a kid. And I marvel, what a wonderful place. I never thought that I'd end up going there. So I was really, very pleased. The Okavango is basically a river, and it's a river delta, but it's a river delta that never gets to the sea. It just comes down through the Caprivi Strip, which is here, and then comes down through into Botswana, and then just dissipates out into the which desert is it now? Kalahari, isn't it? Kalahari Desert, and then just stops. It never gets to the sea. So quite a remarkable place. Now, we were taken out by a chap called Salvation. He took us out on his boat. We were up in this sort of part here, and he took us out in this boat, and we had two species that we particularly wanted to see. And one of those was the African snipe, which, as you're probably aware, doesn't look dissimilar to our common snipe. So here we are. Salvation took this place. This is a good place for snipe. We'll stop here and have a look for them. And as you can see, there's Peter, myself, and Salvation all went ashore and having a good look around trying to find them. We could not find this bird on the deck. Absolutely could not find it on the deck. But as is typical with all snipes, eventually we got a little bit too close to one, and off it went. So this is your African snipe. Gallinago, which means hen-like, and Nigri penis means black-winged or black-winged. So they don't really have much in the way of markings in the wings. You can see them be very dark-looking wings compared to ours. So that was it. We saw it, but it flew around in big circles all around did a few turns, and then quite remarkably, I was about the third or fourth time. I don't know if you have been to anywhere where our snipe breeds, or whether you've heard them do this drumming sound that they do. It sounds like a goat bleating, where they dive down and the wind rushes through their tail feathers, and as they flap their wings, it makes that sort of noise. But incredibly, this bird did just that. It flew around a few times, then it came down very close to the boat. It did its dive, did its display thing, and then darted off over the horizon, never to be seen again. So that was really quite something. So here we are. This is your African snipe, and as you can see, your common snipe here. You can see a few differences. These are much darker in the markings that they do have. It's a bit darker. It's more barred underneath it, but basically, I mean, if one of these turned up on your local pond, you probably wouldn't go, gosh, that looks like an African snipe, would you? Because I'm sure I wouldn't. And I always admire these people who pick out these Wilson snipes on the sillies as well, because having been there a few times and having tried to string a few common snipes myself and failed miserably, I think people who can tell these things apart are blooming marvellous, quite honestly. But anyway, where you see these snipes is not the right place for seeing the other species we wanted to see, which is Lesser Jacana. As a Jacana, you can see this would be much more suitable for them. Unfortunately, during our little trip out with Salvation, we didn't see come across any of this habitat. We didn't see any Jacanas, which is a shame, because the African Jacana, the Lesser Jacana. Did I say African? I meant Lesser Jacana. The Lesser Jacana, one of its hot spots is the Okavango. It's the place where you're most likely to come across them. They're really quite local in their distribution. So I expressed my sorrow having not seen this bird, and Salvation said, "Well, I happen to be free this afternoon. If you would like to go out again, I will take you to somewhere else where you're more likely to see them." And this was the place he took us to. Now, you can see actually that there's a lot of stuff in the water and so on. And he had to drive his boat through this, and so he had to keep stopping every couple of minutes to clear the propeller and so on. So he really did work very, very hard on our behalf. He was a lovely chap, and Salvation by name and Salvation by nature. He turned out that he was bang on, and this was the first view we got of a Lesser Jacana. Absolutely super little birds they are. Microparacapensis. Micro, they're very small, about the size of a sparrow, I think they are. Para, that part comes from a name that was given as the genus of these birds by Linnaeus. So given because it referred to an ancient bird called a para that nobody ever knew what it was. And because he didn't quite know where to put these birds, he gave them the genus para to reflect the fact that he wasn't quite sure where in the scheme of things they should fit. Capensis is a funny name. It means they come from the Cape, and in fact you don't see them at the Cape. And the remarkable thing is that the type specimen of this was collected at the Cape, where there are no Lesser Jacanas. Certainly not now. There may have been some in those days. I can't be sure, but certainly you don't see them down there now. So it's quite a strange name. Now, one of the most remarkable thing about these birds is it's unique actually. They are what they call neotenic. Now, I know you'll know exactly what that means, so I'm not going to bother explaining it. No, I will explain it. Basically, it means they retain a juvenile type plumage their entire life. So what they look like as juveniles, when they molt through, they don't keep the same feathers, but when they molt through, their adult plumage is almost identical to their juvenile plumage, which is quite unusual. So it's given a special term, neotenism. So they're neotenic. Now, if you look at the rump here, some say you can tell the difference because the rump is either chestnut or black, depending on whether it's a young bird or an old bird. Well, it may be true, and this may be a bird in transition. You can see some of it's black and some of it's chestnut. So it's not. I'm not able to tell you exactly what's going on with that. But you can see if you put these are left is a lesser jacana adult, and on the right you've got the African jacana juvenile, and you can see this sort of juvenile sort of plumage with the eye line and the dark cap and the goldy colours here and the white underneath and so on. That's when you look at what an adult looks like, they look quite different to the juveniles, particularly in the head region, but they also become very dark underneath as well. But these, if that is a juvenile or an adult, it'll look pretty much the same all the way through. And so I think it's fair to say that we were all pretty pleased with ourselves, especially young Salvation there at the back, looking extremely pleased with himself. He didn't look so pleased with himself about 5 minutes later because he bent down to clear the propeller for the very last time. There was an ominous plop, and his cell phone fell out of his pocket and into the water, which was, let's face it, pretty awful. I mean, some baboon or other is when the water all dries up later in the year, some baboon's going to find this thing and ring his mum. Go, hello, I found his phone. I've got it. Anyway, so he really did work very, very hard for us. So it was decided that when we tipped him, as indeed we were always going to, we tipped him well enough that he would be able to buy another second-hand phone. Bless him. He really was a wonderful chap. From there, we headed back into South Africa, and we were heading down back towards Johannesburg, and we stayed at this place, which is called the Kakadu. Oh no, not Kakadu, Hakadu, I think it is, bush camp. Now, going back as to my theory about wild animals, it struck me that this was a lump of canvas in the middle of the jungle, and therefore I thought perhaps was pretty vulnerable. But I did bear in mind that as we turned off the road, we went through a great big, like 20-foot high gates, which could only be opened if you had the code, and they open and then shut behind you. So I felt pretty sure that we were going to be protected from wildlife that was going to do us any harm. So I relaxed, and it was great. So it didn't seem to bother me too much that we were going to be in a tent at all that evening. We went and had dinner. We had to. We ate at the place. It was a bit distressing that I decided. Well, the only meat on offer was bushmeat, and as I was tucking into my impala, I glanced up and saw some impala running past, and I felt absolutely terrible about it. But there you go, had to be done. And as the evening drew in, we repaired to the bar, and I was chatting away to the landlord, whose name was Chris, and I told him what we were doing and blah blah blah, and he said, "Oh, we get spotted dickups here, so they call these stone curlews or thickenings dickups. Got spotted dickups here." I said, "Oh, I've never seen one of those." He said, "Really?" He said, "Well, I tell you what, I always go for a walk at dusk. Would you like to come with me, and I'll show you one? Because they're usually in the same place. I'll take you, and you can go and see them." I said, "That'd be fantastic." So Elis and I, armed with a camera and a torch, and Chris and a small dog, whose name escapes me, but I could give it some choice names, but I forget what it is now. As we were setting off, I thought to myself, blimey, I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for those dirty, great big fences all round. As we were going along, and he was telling us all sorts of stories, bless him. And eventually he said, "Right, this is the bush. Have a look under that bush. And underneath that bush, this is the time of day, or an atmospheric shot for you. I'm not sure what the bird is, but we're going to call it a nightjar because it's a nighttime sort of a shot." As we got to the particular bush, he said, "Underneath that bush," and we looked under the bush, and there, in our torchlight, was a spotted thickney. Absolutely smashing. Fantastic. It sat there for quite a long time until it it thought, I'm not sure about this. I better stand up. So it stood up and said, do you prefer my right side or my left side? We took a few photographs. I was quite impressed by the fact that Elise managed to get photographs just using a torch. Well, she wasn't using the torch, she was using the camera. I was holding the torch, and I was quite surprised that we got some quite usable photographs, as you can see. And so after that, we decided we would head back to the camp for a libation to celebrate. And as we did so, Chris started telling us one of his stories. He said, I came out here once, he said, because I asked him whether the dog ever caused him any problems. He said, I came out here once, he said, and I came round the corner, not far from here, and came face to face with 6 gnu's. I said, gnu's? I said, gnu's, they're quite vicious beasts, aren't they? He said, yeah, they can be. I said, I didn't think you had any gnu's in here. He said, in where? I said, well, we came through a dirty great big fence. So he said, that's to keep the people out. I said, oh, right. He said, no, it's just gnu's. Don't worry about it. Anyway, so I said, well, okay. And he told her the story. So we came round from the corner and face to face with these 6 gnu's. And the 6 gnu's looked at me and the dog, and me and the dog looked back at the gnu's, and we just looked at each other. And the gnu's, you could see the thought was going through the head. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Having a little, that noise about, they're having a little conversation. And they obviously decided among themselves that Chris and the dog were no harm, but discretion being the better part of valor, we'll just turn around and we'll stroll away. And they did. They just turned around and strolled away. And at that point, the dog got a fit of bravado and went chasing after them, barking. So you've got this tiny little dog chasing 6 gnu's down this track. And the 6 gnu's are galloping and say, what are we running from, lads? A dog. How big's the dog? Right, it's tiny. How many of them are there? Just one. Hang on a minute. Why are we running then? So they stopped. Said, we're not going to run from him. And they turned round and faced the dog. And the dog then thought, kind of overdone it. I shouldn't have done that. I'm off. And so he turns around and runs back towards Chris. Whereupon the gnu's saying, no, we're winning. And they went charging after them, just like King Harold chasing the Normans down the hill at Hastings. They came charging and charging. Fortunately for Chris, the dog didn't stop where he was. He went running past him, and the gnu's went brushing past Chris in order to get the dog and buffeted him a little bit, but didn't do him any harm at all. And so I don't know why he still talks to that dog and still lets it go out with him. But anyway, they're hardy folk, these South Africans, I have to say. So we went back to the bar and had a drink. I was glad we got back in one piece, as you can imagine. And when we got back to Johannesburg later that evening, there was a phone call at Peter's house where we were staying, and it was Chris. He said, are you still with that Mr. and Mrs. Simpson? He said, yes, yeah. He said, why? He said, well, I thought we'd forgotten something or left something. And he said, well, it's just I wanted to ask a question. Did they hear anything last night when they were in their tent? And they asked us, no, we didn't hear anything. I said, oh, why? Why's that? Well, there was a kill made just outside the tent. I said, oh, really? He said, and we couldn't quite work out whether it was dogs or lions. I mean, really? I'd been wandering around armed with a torch and a camera and a lousy dog where there were lions. I could not believe what I was hearing. I honestly, if I'd have known that, I would have waited till the next day to look for spotted dickups, I can tell you. Anyway, needless to say, we did survive, which was just as well. So we're back now in Johannesburg, and Sue hadn't finished with us yet. She decided there was another courser for us to see, and this one, the double-banded courser, also of least concern, Rhinoptilus africanus. Rhinoptilus means feather-nosed, basically, and africanus is obviously because it's from Africa. Lovely-looking birds. Actually, coursers are really quite sweet birds. So she drove us down to a place called Paris, spelt with a Y and not an I, to look for these birds. And we met up with a chap whose name was Duke Duplessis, and he'd been studying these birds for some time. And it didn't take so long because Duke knew where to look. Then we came across this adult with a chick, and when you first look at the picture, it's not at all obvious where the chick is, but there's a picture of it, so you can get a better look at it. And we were very pleased to see it. They were very, very nice and so on. But then there was sort of an almighty kerfuffle took place, and a crowned lapwing had appeared from nowhere and decided that it had taken exception to the fact that these coursers were in its territory or something or other, and it started chasing them around. And so here's a picture of it chasing one of the coursers. Not the sharpest picture, but you get the picture, as it were. And it's chasing and chasing and chasing. But these coursers, they worked a flanker on this lapwing, because they would run round in quite a big circle and come back to the same place. And then when they got back to that same place, the other one would take over, and the other one would have to sit down and a breather, and the other one would run around in circles being chased by the lapwing, and then eventually would have a rest, and the other one would run around. And this went on for some time. Eventually, the lapwing was utterly exhausted and sort of staggered off into the distance, wondering what the hell had just happened. Why? How had it managed to not catch that rotten courser? That struck me as all really rather amusing. But what wasn't amusing was the story that Dupe told us later on. The reason he knew where these birds were so well was because he'd been studying them for a number of years. And when he first started studying them, there were 14 pairs in this particular area. He said you couldn't have missed them. You would have just not been able to go through this area and not find them. It was quite a defined area. They're not widespread everywhere, but for some reason, this particular place they liked. And one day he went there, and to his dismay, there was a chap driving around on a quad bike. So he sort of communicated with this guy on the quad bike and said, "Look, mate, old chap, this is my study area. I'm studying these birds. Africa's a big place. Would you be a good lad and go and drive your quad bike somewhere else? Because, you're not going to do any harm there. And here it'd be really very, very nice to get on with my studies." Unfortunately, this bike driver was one of those bloody-minded people. So not only did he refuse to leave, he called his mates, and they all went there to have a little drive round. And just to prove how obnoxious they were, they set it up as a quad biking track. And this pair was the last pair that was left from those 14 as a result of all the disturbance. And that chick that you saw was the last one ever bred at that particular area. And so you can see it isn't always the obvious things that cause problems for waders. It's things like this. There's a little moments like this which were epiphany moments for us, where we realize that it doesn't matter what habitat a wader lives in, whether it's waterborne or very dry like this, there is always something that is working against them. And more in this world, this is what's happening, unfortunately. So it took us back to Johannesburg, and we jumped on a plane. We didn't come home, but we went down to Cape Town for a very short stay. You'll be pleased to know it was a very short stay. And you'll recognise this place, I'm sure. It's Table Mountain. Those wonderful waves coming in. When we got off the plane, we jumped in the car and we headed down to where we were going to be staying that night. Unfortunately, somehow or other, I managed to get the directions all wrong. And a journey that should have taken us 20 minutes, we're about 40 minutes into the journey when I sort of started to twig that I'd done something wrong. Now I saw a big sign, it said Simonstown. And I thought, oh, Simonstown, that rings a bell. What about Simonstown? Oh, I know what it is. There's a place there called Boulder Bay, Boulder Beach rather, where they have African penguins. And since that sign said that we were very close to Simonstown, I decided that despite the fact because we were already late, we might just as well go and see the penguins. And so we followed the signs to Simonstown and eventually found Boulders Beach. And when we got there, anybody who thinks that finding penguins is easy, think again. Penguins are notoriously difficult. They really are very, very difficult. So when you get out of your car, unless you're a really top birdie, you're going to have real problems finding them. Or you could just follow the signs, of course, which points you to where the penguins are. You go down to the beach and, sure enough, there they are. African penguins, Spheniscus demersus. Phenescus meaning wedge-shaped and refers to the flippers, I suppose. Demersus meaning plunge or submerge, and refers to the way that all penguins swim. That thing where they do what we call porpoising, I suppose. So yes, they were very easy to see. I was obviously pulling their leg. Lovely to see them. Penguins are such fun, aren't they? And whenever I look at them, I think I can't believe they're birds, but I'm so glad they are because they're great. And we go penguin watching, and the penguins go people watching. They sneak in amongst these rocks and suddenly appear behind you and bark at you like a jackass, which I think they used to be called jackass penguins at one point. But as we were, and in fact, as I was taking this picture of Elis, conversing with a penguin, I heard a very familiar sound behind me. It was so familiar, but not quite familiar. It was a piping sound that you people in Bangor down there on the beach, you will be very, very familiar with. The sound of an oystercatcher. So I turned around, and whatever we have behind us, sitting on one of the rocks, but an African oystercatcher, Hematopus mockini. And what a bird it is, isn't it? A striking bird. And it is very, very interesting bird. The name Hematopus means bloodfoot, and mockini was named after a chap called Alfred Mock in Tandon way back in the 1800s. I think it was named by no less than Bonaparte. Anyway, it was this wasn't Napoleon Bonaparte. It was one of his nephews, Charles Julian Bonaparte. Anyway, the population trend of this bird is growing. It was diminishing drastically. A couple of things have happened. Firstly, the South African government banned people from driving on beaches. Most black oystercatcher species breed on rocks, but this one is one that likes to breed on the sand. So it suffered a lot with people driving vehicles up and down the beaches, squashing the eggs and killing the young, etc., etc. So that ban really helped. They were also helped by the fact that there was a species of mussel that had somehow been transported from the Mediterranean, found that the Cape Coast was to its liking, and spread very, very quickly. Now, it's a pest species, but this bird absolutely depends on it. And as a result of this massive new food source, they have done very, very well. Safer breeding, lots of food. Many of them actually breed on islands. But the unfortunate thing about the ones that breed on islands is very few of the chicks survive. They're fine while they're on the islands, but they can't get to the shores. So the sea between the island and the mainland is too rough for them, and if they try to swim across, generally they drown. So it's a bit surprising that they still do that and nest on the islands. The other thing that's very interesting about this species is many of the first year birds used to, well, still do in fact, travel north. They fly along the coast north up into Namibia, and there they will spend a year, maybe two, as they mature. And when they become mature birds, they then fly back south, down back into South Africa, and then never, ever return to Namibia. They just go there for those first couple of years and then come back again. Having said that, the population is spreading north along the coast anyway. So actually there are some resident adults there now as well. This is partly due to the spreading of these mussels. Anyway, so that was great. We eventually dragged ourselves away from there and found our way back to our B&B. And that evening we were to go and meet our hosts for the next day. And we went out and had dinner with Trevor and Margaret Hardaker, who you may have heard of. Generally, Trevor runs pelagic trips out of Cape Town. Here they are, handsome couple, lovely, lovely people. And we had a very splendid evening with them. You probably noticed the bottom left-hand corner there. There's a bottle of wine, and they happen to be fond of wine as well as us. And we were talking about all sorts of different wine. Whereupon Margaret, bless her little heart, said, "I know of a wine that I think that you'll like. Not only will you like it, I think you'll find that it was made especially for you." I said, "Oh yeah, what's that?" And so she ordered a bottle. I'm not sure that Margaret's still on my Christmas card list, but there you go. It turned out to be actually a very, very nice wine. But there you go. That's obviously what they thought of me. Unfortunately, Margaret was unable to join us the next day, but Trevor did take us out and he took us around Cape Town. And this is not what you would imagine Africa to look like, is it? It's absolutely beautiful down there. It was their springtime. These meadows absolutely stuffed with these beautiful flowers and blue cranes and floricans. There are floricans there. Blue cranes and perhaps I think they're called floricans there.
Right.
And the kites. Oh, it's just wonderful, wonderful place. Because we were after waders, and there were only a couple of species left that we still had to find. So Trevor's job was easier, but not so easy, because if you've got only two species, not seeing them makes it all the more difficult. So he took us to a place called Quifkopvisvanger, and Quifkopvisvanger means that malachite kingfisher. That's their name for a Quifkopvisvanger. Anyway, Corythornis cristatus. Now, Corythornis, now that means something to do with helmets, I think. Corythornis, Ornis is obviously bird. Yes, Coryth, I think, is helmet, and cristatus means obviously crested. So it's a crested helmet bird, and you can see sort of quite appropriate, really. I think actually it's easier to call them a Quifkopvisvanger, to be honest with you. But anyway, beautiful birds as they are, that wasn't why we were there. We were there to look, and places like this. It's a lovely salt pan, back from the coast, a lovely looking place. And the bird we were looking for became visible almost immediately. A chested banded plover. It's near threatened. So these are birds that are not doing so well. Charadrius pallidus, obviously a very pale bird, as you can see. And if you think that's pale, that's a male. This is the female. She's even more pale. And we enjoyed watching these birds running around, catching flies, and they had quite an unusual method of trying to catch flies. They would crouch down and run very fast towards the flies that were on the ground and snap at them as they took off and so on. Very, very amusing, and we spent quite a lot of time watching them. They're just a lot of fun. Eventually, of course, Trevor said, well, we've got a little way to go to the next place where we're going to look for your other bird. And this is a place called Moritz Bay. Or is it St. Moritz? No, just Moritz Bay. Now, the first thing you notice when you get to Moritz Bay, the first thing he pointed out to us was all of these buildings. So these are all new. You can see they're new. This place was deserted 2 years ago. There was nobody here at all. There were lots and lots and lots of birds. Now these holiday homes have been built. Nobody lives there, but during the breeding season, of course, they're full of people, full of families with children, dogs, and they're having a devastating effect on the population of the birds that live on this beach, and one of which is the species that we were after, the white-fronted plover. This bit here, the front of the head being the fronted bit that they refer to, marginatus. I'm not quite sure why it's called marginatus, unless it's just because it lives in the margins of water and land. I've not really discovered anything specific about that. But you can see, obviously, despite the diminished population, we were able to see a good number of them, and saw them very, very well. They're lovely little birds. Plovers are just super little birds. As we were walking back to the car, suddenly a movement below our feet made us stop. I don't know if you can see it. This is a white-fronted plover doing what plovers do very well. They do this distraction display to make you not pay attention to what you're doing, so you follow them, and therefore you don't pay any attention to their chicks or eggs. And Trevor said, he said, that bird has either got eggs or chicks. Now, if it's got eggs, the chances are it's covered them with sand, because it's something that white-faced plovers do regularly. It's covered with them with sand, so you won't be able to see them. And if it's got chicks, they will lay down flat on the sand, and you won't be able to see them, which means where we're standing, in any direction that we step, we could tread on an egg or a chick. So we had better not do that. So we'd have to walk on the rocks, and we had to hop across all these rocks all the way back to get to the car. Well, we didn't go all the way back to the car that way, but we had to hop on the rocks for quite a long way before we could be sure that we weren't going to do any damage to the young birds. And that was the end of our birding in Southern Africa. Obviously, you can see we had a great time, a few mishaps and so on. But I'd just like to remind you a couple of bits about why waded crest exists and so on. 48% of known waded population has declined. 30% of all waded species are extinct, threatened, or near threatened. Waders are in peril. They're not doing well at all. As you say, half in decline, a third of them are sort of under threat of some sort. So what is it the waded quest does? Well, we have two aims, basically, to raise awareness about the challenges waders face in the modern world and to raise funds, of course, as a charity, to support wader conservation initiatives worldwide, especially those involving locally led community projects. So that part's important. Is the locally led projects, the places where people are looking after their own birds in their own community. That is important to us. How do we use your money? A total raise, you can see, is actually higher than that now. I haven't updated that for a few months. How do we use your money? Well, I can tell you waded crest is entirely voluntary. We don't get paid anything. We don't pay anybody anything. All volunteers are literally that, volunteers, and that includes Elis and myself. And how could you get involved? Well, people often ask us how you get involved, and there are a number of things you can do. If you're, that should be an X now, that little Twitter thing, shouldn't it? If you're got any of these platforms on your computer, if you put waded quest in them, you'll find us. Have a look at what we're doing, share our stuff, and hopefully we'll be able to reach more people that we wouldn't perhaps have reached otherwise. That would be a very great help for us in our awareness raising efforts. Also, I don't know if any of you have joined our Waded Conservation World Watch before. Every November, the first weekend, we go out, and people all around the world go out and look for waders. They send us their details, either through eBird or by email or through the website. There's a form you can fill in. Tell us what waders you've seen, where, and with whom. And the with whom is important because we make a list of everybody's name, everybody around the world that's taken part, and we have a roll of honour, and they all go into a newsletter with pictures, and that's just wonderful fun. But the point is, it's awareness raising, because people go out and do this, they'll drag their friends along, other people will see them doing it, ask them why, and so for us it's a very good way of getting our name known further around the world. And of course, the greater the number of people that can be made aware of the plight of waders, the more people there are that will care, and the greater the number of people that care, the more chance we have of changing things. So this is your chance to stand up and say, I care. And caring is the first step to conservation. You can join our executive committee. All meetings are online, so you don't have to live close to us. So that's we're always looking for people who are going to help us. You can become a friend of waded quest, of course. 100% of your payment will go to waded conservation because it goes in a grants fund and is used for nothing but waded conservation. And look at that, individual, £10. It's not a week, it's not a month, that's a year. That's a couple of Costa coffees from where I came from. So, there's a lot. I know we're all suffering a lot at the moment, but £10 for a whole year, that's about 19p a week, I think. And that every penny of that is going to go to waded conservation. What do you get? Well, you get a free, warm, fuzzy feeling inside. I'm afraid that's all you get because we want to spend our money on helping waders, not giving away freebies. Of course, the intensity may vary. You can make a donation online if you wish. 100%, all of that goes to waded conservation as well. Or if you want to have something for your money, you can always buy some of our merchandising, books or pin badges or earrings, and 25% of that will also go to waded conservation. So you can also feel good about yourself by buying something from us. So there you are. Excuse me. Waded crest is the natural home for wader lovers. We're passionate about our waders, and if you are too, well, why don't you come and join us? Thank you, Bangor Bird Group, for your time this evening, for paying attention and for staying awake if indeed you did. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing now. Back to you, Nigel.
Thank you very much indeed, Rick. Yeah, well, we certainly are still with you, wide awake, and enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Again, very evocative images there from Southern Africa. You covered so much. And I imagine there are a few questions in store for you. So if you don't mind, I'd like to open it up for questions for Rick, or indeed for Elis, about what we've just heard.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Can I kick off by asking you a bit of a specific question about the lovely Kittlitz plover, which, like you, has always caught my attention with that name. Do they? You might have said, and I didn't hear. Do they breed in that part, or are they migratory? There's different populations, aren't there? The length and breadth of
they're all pretty. I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure they're all resident. Pretty much resident. There may be some local dispersal from breeding grounds to feeding grounds, so to speak. But a bit like our lapwings, they'll breed on the moors, but they'll winter down on the coast and so on.
Yeah.
There may be a bit of seasonal movement in that sense, but they're not. I don't think they're considered migrant birds. I don't think they sort of fly from South Africa up to the top and back again in any great distances. Because if they did, I suppose there would always be the hope that one would end up in Kent or somewhere, and we could all go and tick it off and hopefully spell its name right this time. But I think they're resident.
But given that situation, there might well be quite a lot of significant genetic difference between the populations up and down Africa. Which
I think they're I think Kittlitz is the one that there's a species on St. Helena, which is called the St. Helena plover, and also one on Madagascar called the Madagascar plover, which are very, very similar to the Kitlitz's plover. So they've obviously come from the same stem, but they end up as three species. Bless them.
Yeah. Oh, very interesting. Thank you. Thanks very much. Any other questions for Rick?
Yeah, I've got a quick question, if that's okay. Great talk. Really loved it. It's fantastic. And I was quite impressed with Birchill's Corsair, how orangey it is. I was just wondering, is there a wader in the world that you've not seen yet that you really, really want to see? And have you got any plans to go and see it?
Oh, the answer to that is yes, there's lots, and they're all the one I want to most see. But I think if I were to put any one of the Madagascar endemics, but for me, the one that captures my imagination most is the bristle-thighed curlew. It breeds up there on I talked about it in the last talk. It breeds up there in Alaska and winters on the oceanic islands. And one of the easiest places to see it is actually in Hawaii. And I've always wanted to go there too. So you never know, one day I might win the lottery. As unfortunately, at the moment, we're not doing an awful lot of traveling. So for me, it would be bristle-thighed curlew. What about you?
I was thinking about St. Helena.
St. Helena's plover. Yeah, okay. Yeah, St. Helena's plover would be. But if you go to St. Helena, all you see is St. Helena's plover. Yeah. It's because the other endemics, I think, have all gone now. So yeah, so that would be it for me.
Excellent. If you did see it, would you tweak the Wader Quest badge and change it from a Wimbrel to a bristle-thighed curlew?
No, well done for knowing it's a Wimbrel, because most people say it's a curlew. No. It would always be the Wimbrel.
Actually, our first logo was the Spoonbill Sandpiper.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
But my trustees didn't like it. They said, "No, you've got to change that." So
it was so hard to change, wasn't it?
It was heartbreaking. But there you go. We ended up quite happy with the one we got. So designed it ourselves, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
It was actually taken from a photograph of a Hudsonian Wimbrel. Not that I would expect for you to have been able to discern the difference, but it was taken from that.
Not on the head. Yeah. I'd quite like to see diademed sandpiper plover, but I'm just fearful of the altitude.
Oh well, yeah. We did see diademed sandpiper plover, and the altitude was horrendous because we were doing it on a shoestring, doing it quickly, and we
That's
stopped
straight
halfway
away.
up overnight and then went to the top,
Yeah.
and we got, oh, it was awful.
But we know somebody actually fell very sick, wasn't it? With up there, and
Fortunately for him, it was at a place where the bird could be seen from the bus, and he was so sick that he couldn't get out of the bus, the minibus to look at the bird. So they manoeuvred the bus. So they lifted his head up like that, put the scope, and said, "Look through the scope." Yeah, got it, all right. That was his experience of a diadem sandpiper plover. So it wasn't very nice. We were better than that, but I must admit I was so tired that I very nearly sat in a cactus thinking it was a stone or a rock because I was so tired.
How high were you?
I would have made a better story than wouldn't it?
How high were you?
Oh, 4,800 meters.
Okay.
High enough.
Yeah.
It was pretty grim up there, but lovely scenery, beautiful scenery. Yeah, it's so clear. It was lovely.
It's not they come down a little bit when they're nesting.
No, they nest at the top on the puna, and they come down.
Yeah.
When they come down, they could be anywhere. That's the
Disperse,
thing.
yeah.
So you need to go to the breeding grounds to because they're in a particular valley. It makes life a lot easier.
Which country was that in South America?
I was in Peru.
Okay.
There is a place near Santiago in Chile, which is not so high, which a lot of people choose to go to. I don't know how reliable they are there, but if you're ever going to Peru and you want to see them, I've got a very good guide, the guy who took us. I'll give you his number.
Okay.
He lives in the Santa Eulalia Valley now, so he's very familiar with them.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Rick. Any other questions?
I told you they've all gone home. All gone to sleep. Yeah.
Well, if there aren't, then it's my pleasant job to say thank you to you both. But not just like that, because that was another fantastic talk that you've given us, the third in a row, and it was notable for lots of reasons. Firstly, the images. I mean, there was, without exception, brilliant images, really close studies. Thank you, Elis.
Thank you.
Photography. It really brings it home to us here in the comfort of our home how wonderful these birds are, without going to all the effort that you and Rick had to go to and the scrapes you got into to see them. So thank you for making it so easy and enjoyable for us. But it's that close familiarity with the birds that you get from the images, and then that is added to, augmented by your descriptions, that really makes the talk memorable. And yeah, I mean, there were some fat birds there, and like Steve, I was really taken with that Birchell's courser. I mean, the colours, that
beautiful,
and plumage, fantastic, and its situation. That was really one of the standout birds. But there were quite a few others, of course. So thank you for that, and also for painting a vivid picture, both visually and in your descriptions of the various habitats that these birds live in. That's their home. That's so important, and also the pressures on those habitats that sometimes obvious and sometimes not so obvious. I like the way that you balance some of the negative trends with some of the positive ones. Really pleasing to hear of an oystercatcher doing well, and what can be achieved by a simple edict such as not driving along a beach. So good luck to the African oystercatcher. And that was also a really quite unusual example of an invasive species having a positive effect, a benefit for a native species, something that we don't tend to think of.
What I don't know, though, is whether or not it has a positive effect on the local mussels. It may be good for the oyster catchers, but it may be disastrous for something else. But
yes, I guess.
But who cares? It's for the oyster catchers.
Thank you too for painting a picture about the individual behaviour, because clearly waders are not all about plumage and habitat, but they're about what they do. And you described very vividly some of the ways they defend themselves, just the way they forage. It's all part of their jizz and their interest and personality. So that was lovely. and also the derivation of their names. And that's something many of us speakers don't do, but it added to tonight's talk enormously. And the scientific names are there for a purpose. They're also highly descriptive, and they reveal that the people that originally named them really knew what they were talking about, got to know the birds in ways that perhaps scientists, we don't think of as doing so much these days. And then the reference back to, people like Gitzlitz, and other great pioneers of ornithology is always so interesting and inspiring, I think. I think your charity is so commendable for all the reasons that you outlined at the end. And I'm glad that you took the opportunity to promote it because it's so worthy. And I hope people will take up some of the initiatives that you suggested there. But I think that point about your concentrating on locally led community projects is so important. There's no point in us pontificating about what we should and shouldn't be conserving in the world. To people far away, they're not going to listen. They have to take the lead in conserving those birds because they love them. They love them as species and where they live as habitats. That's so important. And I think that your money is going in a best direction with these locally led community projects. So all strength to you both in keeping promoting that. I hope everybody that's listened tonight will put their hands in their pockets and support your very worthy cause. Bird Group will be making its usual donation to you by way of thanks and also to help conserve these species for the future. We look forward to inviting you back again if you don't mind, because clearly you travel so widely. Your knowledge is unparalleled in terms of global waders, and we thank you for taking the time and effort to reveal some of it to us.
I went to last week's and it logged on straight away for this meeting.
Here on the West Coast. Yeah. Bye-bye for now, and thank you again from all of us in Bird Group. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.